About this book. Welcome to the 1% Effect, a science-backed guide to the most powerful, underestimated strategy for achieving lasting change in your life. This book is built on a deceptively simple premise, that the path to an extraordinary life is paved not with dramatic transformations or sudden breakthroughs, but with thousands of small, deliberate improvements made consistently over time. The mathematics of compound growth, the same math that makes compound interest so powerful in finance, applies with equal ferocity to human development. Improve by just 1% each day, and after 1 year, you are 37 times better than when you started. This is not motivational rhetoric. This is mathematics. Drawing on decades of research in neuroscience, behavioral psychology, habit science, and performance psychology, this book gives you the science, the strategies, and the practical systems to harness the 1% effect in your own life, starting today. Whether you are 25 or 70, whether you are starting from scratch or looking to optimize an already successful life, the principles in these pages will meet you where you are and show you the path forward. Not a path of radical reinvention, but something more powerful. The path of relentless, incremental, compounding growth. Read actively. Take notes. Identify the one practice from each chapter that resonates most with your current life. And above all, start small, stay consistent, and trust the math. The life you're imagining is closer than you think. 1% at a time. The power of micro wins. Why small is the new big. Every single morning, you wake up with something most people never stop to appreciate, a completely fresh opportunity. Not just another day to survive, but a genuine chance to become a slightly better version of yourself, to stretch beyond yesterday's limits, to close the gap between who you are and who you know you could be. But here's what nobody tells you, and what the science now confirms with startling clarity. Real transformation doesn't come from massive, dramatic overhauls. It doesn't arrive on the back of a single life-changing moment or a thunderbolt of inspiration. It shows up quietly, every single day, in the form of small, deliberate, compounding choices. The thing that actually moves the needle forward isn't the giant leap. It's the tiny step, repeated with relentless consistency. Think about that for a moment, because it runs directly counter to everything our culture tells us about success. We live in a world obsessed with big launches, big breakthroughs, big transformations. Every week, social media feeds overflow with before and after stories, sudden success reveals, and highlight reels of people who seem to have transformed overnight. We're wired to chase the dramatic shift, the turning point, the moment when everything changes. But dig beneath the surface of any truly extraordinary life, and you'll find something different. You won't find a single lightning bolt. You'll find 1,000 tiny sparks, each one almost invisible, all of them adding up to something nobody could have predicted from the outside. This book is about those sparks. It's about the neuroscience of habit, the psychology of behavior change, and the surprisingly simple principles that separate people who drift through life from people who deliberately build the life they actually want. It's grounded in decades of research from the world's leading behavioral scientists, psychologists, and performance experts, and it's written for anyone between 25 and 70 who has ever looked in the mirror and thought, "I know I'm capable of more than this." The central idea is one that sounds almost too simple to be true. If you get just 1% better every single day, the math of compound growth will take care of the rest. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, made this calculation famous. 1% better each day for a year equals 37 times better by year's end. 1% worse each day for a year, and you decay to nearly zero. The same math that makes compound interest the most powerful force in finance turns out to apply just as ferociously to human potential. But understanding the math is the easy part. Living it is where most people struggle. And that's exactly what we're here to address. The seed doesn't rush. Let's start with a metaphor that might be the most honest description of personal growth ever invented. When a farmer plants a corn seed in Iowa soil in late April, he doesn't return the next morning expecting a stalk. He waters it. He monitors the soil temperature. He watches the sky for rain. He comes back again and again, day after day, doing the same quiet, unglamorous work, trusting a process he cannot yet see. For weeks, nothing visible happens. To a passerby, the field looks empty, dormant, dead. But underground, extraordinary things are occurring. Root systems are spreading. Cellular structures are forming. Millions of biological processes are firing in coordinated sequences that even modern science can't fully replicate. And then, one morning in late May, a tiny green shoot breaks the surface. Human development works exactly the same way. The real growth always happens underground, invisible, accumulating, until the day it suddenly isn't invisible anymore. The problem is, most of us give up during the underground phase. We start a new habit with the best of intentions. We track our calories for 3 days, then fall off the wagon. We meditate for a week, skip 2 days, and declare ourselves not the meditating type. We start waking up at 5:30 a.m. for 4 glorious mornings, then sleep through the alarm and decide early rising just isn't for us. We're not lazy, we're simply impatient. We're looking for the shoot before the root has had time to form. Stanford psychologist Dr. B.J. Fogg spent over 20 years studying human behavior and habit formation. His landmark research, which became the basis for his best-selling book, Tiny Habits, revealed something counterintuitive. The biggest obstacle to lasting behavior change isn't lack of motivation. It's starting too big. When we attempt massive changes, we activate what Fogg calls the behavioral immune system, the brain's deep-rooted resistance to disruption of established patterns. The solution? Make the starting behavior so small it's almost ridiculous. Want to read more? Don't commit to 30 minutes a night. Commit to 2 pages. Want to meditate? Don't aim for 20 minutes. Sit quietly for 60 seconds after your morning coffee. Want to exercise more? Don't sign up for a marathon program. Do 2 push-ups before you shower. I know what you're thinking. 2 push-ups? That's not going to get me anywhere. But here's the thing, and this is the insight that changes everything once you truly absorb it. The value of the tiny action is not in its immediate output. The value is in the identity signal it sends to your brain. Every time you do your 2 push-ups, your brain records, "I am someone who exercises." Every time you read your 2 pages, it records, "I am a reader." Every time you sit quietly for 60 seconds, it records, "I am someone who takes care of their mental health." These identity signals accumulate. And, as the psychologist and philosopher William James observed over a century ago, what you believe about yourself eventually becomes who you are. The scoreboard nobody talks about, Dr. Carol Dweck at Stanford, spent 3 decades studying what separates people who grow from people who stagnate. Her research, summarized in her landmark book, Mindset, identified 2 fundamentally different ways people relate to their own abilities. People with what she calls a fixed mindset believe their qualities are carved in stone. You have a certain amount of intelligence, a certain amount of talent, and that's your ceiling. People with a growth mindset believe that their most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. Brains and talent are just the starting point. What makes Dweck's research so powerful is that the mindset difference shows up not in big moments, but in tiny, everyday reactions to small setbacks. When a fixed mindset person makes a mistake on a project, they hear, "I'm not smart enough for this." When a growth mindset person makes the same mistake, they hear, "Interesting, what can I learn from this?" Same event, completely different inner narrative, and those narratives, firing dozens of times a day across thousands of days, determine the trajectory of an entire life. Here's the practical application. Start keeping what I call the micro-win scoreboard. Every evening before you sleep, write down 3 things that went 1% better today than they did yesterday. Not 3 accomplishments, not 3 completed tasks. 3 incremental improvements, no matter how minor. Maybe you drank 1 extra glass of water. Maybe you said, "Good morning," to a colleague you've been ignoring. Maybe you resisted the urge to check your phone for an extra 15 minutes. These things feel trivial. They are not. Research by Teresa Amabile and Stephen Kramer at Harvard Business School analyzed thousands of daily diary entries from workers across multiple industries and discovered what they called the progress principle. Of all the things that boost motivation, engagement, and creative output, the most powerful is the simple experience of making progress, even small progress, on meaningful work. People who track and acknowledge their micro-wins don't just feel better. They perform measurably better. They persist longer. They're more resilient under pressure. They're more likely to still be going 6 months later. The scoreboard isn't about feeling good. It's about building the neural evidence that you are, in fact, moving forward. In a world that only celebrates the finish line, the micro-win scoreboard teaches you to celebrate. The mile marker. Chunking the mountain. Let's get practical, because abstract inspiration without concrete strategy is just entertainment. If your goal is to finally get in shape after years of sedentary living, don't start with a 5-day gym program. Start with 10 minutes of walking 3 times a week. When that feels easy, and it will within 2 weeks, add 5 minutes. Then add a 4th day. Then gradually increase intensity. In 6 months, you'll be doing things that would have felt impossible at the start. If you want to build a reading habit, don't start with a goal of 30 books this year. Start with 8 minutes of reading every night before sleep. Set a timer. 8 minutes is achievable on your worst day. Tack it on to something you already do. Maybe brushing your teeth is your trigger. Brush your teeth, then read for 8 minutes. The pairing matters. The consistency matters more than the duration. If your goal is to improve your financial situation, don't try to overhaul your entire budget in one weekend. Start by reviewing your last 3 bank statements and circling one spending category where you can redirect $25 a month toward savings. Just $25, just one category, just this month. In each case, the starting point feels almost embarrassingly small. That's exactly the point. You're not trying to transform overnight. You're trying to install a system, a behavioral infrastructure, that will run on autopilot and compound over time. The behavioral scientist Wendy Wood at the University of Southern California found in her research that approximately 43% of daily behaviors are habitual, meaning they're performed automatically in the same context and location without conscious deliberation. 43%. Nearly half of everything you do every day is on autopilot. That's terrifying if those automatic behaviors are working against you. But it's immensely empowering if you understand that you can deliberately design which behaviors become automatic. That's the real game. Not white-knuckling your way through every day by willpower alone, but engineering your environment and your routines so that the right behaviors become the default. Small starts are how you install new default settings. The question isn't, how do I completely change my life? The question is, what's one small thing I can do differently tomorrow morning? Answer that question honestly. Then do it. Then do it again the next day. And watch what the math of consistency builds for you over the coming months and years. Because here's the truth about extraordinary lives. They're not built in extraordinary moments. They're built in ordinary moments, lived with a little more intention than the day before. That's the 1% effect, and it starts now. Rewiring your mental software. The neuroscience of thought transformation. In 2007, researchers at the University of Michigan conducted a study that quietly changed how scientists understand human achievement. They asked a group of college students to recall a time they had failed at something important, and then assessed how each student mentally processed that failure. What they found wasn't just academically interesting, it was practically life-changing. Students who approached the failure with curious, investigative self-reflection, asking, "What happened here? What can I learn?" showed dramatically improved performance on subsequent tasks compared to students who simply analyzed the failure from the perspective of what went wrong. The difference wasn't in the raw intelligence of the students. It wasn't in their previous academic performance. It was entirely in the mental framework they brought to the experience of struggle. Your thoughts, it turns out, are not passive observers of your life. They are the architects of it. Every thought you repeat reinforces a neural pathway. Every belief you hold shapes the lens through which you filter reality. Every internal narrative you run about your worth, your capability, your potential, becomes a kind of operating system that determines far more than your circumstances what you're able to achieve. And the science is now clear. That operating system can be updated. The garden metaphor and its limits. Gardening metaphors for the mind have been popular since at least William James wrote about habit in the 1880s. Plant good seeds, tend them carefully, and they grow. Plant weeds, and they'll take over. It's a useful picture, but it has one major limitation. It can make mental change feel passive, as if we simply need to plant better thoughts and wait for growth. The neuroscience is more dynamic than that, and more empowering. When you engage in a new pattern of thinking, you are literally changing the physical structure of your brain. This process, called neuroplasticity, was one of the most significant scientific discoveries of the 20th century. For most of modern history, scientists believed the brain was essentially fixed after childhood, a static organ that could be damaged but not fundamentally rebuilt. We now know that's wrong. The brain is plastic. It rewires in response to repeated experience. New neural connections form. Old ones, deprived of use, fade. The thoughts you think most often carve the deepest grooves. And the grooves that are carved most deeply determine your default experience of reality. At Harvard Medical School, neurologist Alvaro Pascual Leone conducted a now famous study demonstrating that people who merely visualized playing piano exercises without touching a single key developed measurable changes in the motor cortex regions of their brains. Mental practice created real structural change. The boundary between imagination and reality, at the level of neuroscience, is far thinner than we typically assume. This has enormous practical implications. The stories you tell yourself about what you're capable of are not just psychological phenomena. They're biological events, and they can be changed. Identifying the invisible chains, before you can rewrite your mental software, you need to see it clearly. Most of us carry what cognitive therapists call limiting beliefs, deeply held assumptions about ourselves and the world that constrain what we're willing to attempt. These beliefs often originate in childhood, in formative experiences of rejection or failure, in messages received from parents, teachers, or peers. They don't announce themselves. They operate in the background, subtly steering decisions, coloring perceptions, whispering discouragement in the moments we need confidence most. A limiting belief might sound like, I'm not the kind of person who succeeds financially. Or, I was never good at relationships. Or, people like me don't get opportunities like that. Or, I missed my window, it's too late for me now. Identifying these beliefs requires a specific practice that psychologists call cognitive diffusion, a technique from acceptance and commitment therapy developed by Dr. Stephen Hayes at the University of Nevada. The principle is simple. Your thoughts are not facts, they are mental events, and you can learn to observe them from a distance rather than being fused with them. Here's a practical exercise. For 1 week, keep a thought journal. Every time you notice yourself thinking something negative about your own potential or capability, write it down. Don't judge it. Don't try to immediately counteract it. Just record it. The act of writing creates distance. It moves the thought from the shadowy operating system to the visible desktop where you can examine it. Then, for each belief you've recorded, ask 3 questions. First, what evidence actually supports this belief? Second, what evidence contradicts this belief? Third, if a close friend told me they believed this about themselves, what would I say to them? This simple process, repeated consistently, begins the rewiring. You're not trying to swap negative thoughts for relentlessly positive ones. That kind of forced positivity tends to backfire because the brain recognizes dishonesty. You're learning to hold your thoughts more lightly, to question them more rigorously, and to replace rigid, self-limiting narratives with more accurate and flexible ones. The language you use with yourself. In 2014, psychologist Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan published research demonstrating something remarkable about self-talk. When people used their own name to address themselves internally, as in, David, you can handle this, instead of, I don't know if I can handle this, they showed significantly reduced activity in the brain regions associated with anxiety and significantly improved performance on stressful tasks. This might seem like a trivial linguistic trick. It isn't. The shift from first-person to name-based self-talk creates psychological distance. It activates the same mental processes we use when advising a friend. And we're far better at advising friends than we are at advising ourselves. We're kinder, clearer, and more constructive. The broader principle is this. The specific words you use in your internal dialogue shape your experience as powerfully as any external event. Language is not just a way to describe your internal state. It is, in large part, the mechanism through which that state is created. Here's the reframe practice. Take any negative limiting phrase you commonly say to yourself and upgrade it. Not to something you don't believe, but to something truer and more open. I can't do this becomes I haven't figured this out yet. I'm terrible at discipline becomes I'm building my discipline muscles. I always fail becomes I've failed at this before, and I've also succeeded at other hard things. It's too late for me becomes I'm starting from where I am right now. Each of these rewrites is small, each one is honest, and each one, repeated enough times, reshapes the groove. A word about failure because it's central to this chapter's argument. Our culture has an awkward, ambivalent relationship with failure. We know intellectually that failure is necessary for growth, but emotionally, we're still deeply uncomfortable with it. We avoid risks to avoid the experience of failing. We call ourselves realistic when what we're actually being is fearful. The most consistently successful people throughout history, the inventors, entrepreneurs, scientists, artists, and athletes we most admire, didn't have fewer failures than everyone else. They had more. What they had was a mental framework that processed failure as data rather than verdict. They asked, "What does this tell me?" rather than, "What does this say about me?" And that single difference in mental framing made them capable of continuing when everyone else had stopped. Rewiring your mental software is perhaps the most important work described in this book, because no strategy, no habit system, no productivity tool will compensate for a mind that has decided, somewhere in its deepest structures, that you aren't capable of the life you're imagining. That decision can be reversed. It takes time, it takes practice. But the brain that stands between you and your potential is also the most extraordinary renovation project you will ever undertake. Start today. Notice one limiting thought. Write it down, question it, replace it with something truer. That's 1% better thinking. Do it again tomorrow. The Visualization Protocol. Before we leave this chapter, let's talk about one of the most misunderstood tools in the self-development world: visualization. Many people dismiss visualization as motivational fluff, a practice for the soft-minded who prefer daydreaming to doing. The science tells a different story. Researcher Guang Yue at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation ran a study in which participants imagined themselves doing bicep curls without actually performing the physical exercise. After 12 weeks, this group showed a 13.5% increase in muscle strength, compared to a 30% increase in those who physically exercised and a 0% change in the control group. Mental rehearsal produces real, measurable physical change. The mechanism is neurological. When you vividly imagine a specific action or outcome, your brain activates many of the same neural pathways as when you're actually performing that action. Repeated visualization builds mental grooves, the same grooves that you need when the actual moment of action arrives. But effective visualization isn't vague daydreaming about success. Research by Gabriele Oettingen at New York University found that people who only visualize positive outcomes often become less motivated, not more. The fantasy provides a sense of completion that undercuts the drive to act. The technique that works is called mental contrasting. First, vividly imagine the desired positive outcome. Then, immediately contrast it with the current reality and the specific obstacles between you and the goal. This combination, positive vision followed by honest obstacle assessment, produces dramatically higher action rates and goal attainment than either positive thinking or obstacle analysis alone. Each evening, practice this 2-minute protocol. Imagine one specific thing you want to be different in 6 months. Make it vivid. See it, feel it, inhabit it. Then honestly identify the single biggest obstacle standing between your current reality and that vision. Then ask, what's one thing I can do tomorrow that moves me one step past that obstacle? Write down the answer. Do that thing. That's mental software rewiring applied to daily life. That's the 1% effect in your thinking. The discipline engine building the system that runs. When motivation doesn't, let's talk about motivation. Specifically, let's talk about why relying on it is a setup for failure. Motivation is not a character trait, it's a feeling. And like all feelings, it's transient, inconsistent, and entirely unreliable as a foundation for building a meaningful life. On any given Monday morning, you can feel absolutely fired up, crystal clear on your goals, buzzing with energy, ready to conquer the week. By Wednesday afternoon, that fire is down to embers. By Friday evening, you can barely remember what you were so excited about. The motivation hasn't gone anywhere specific. It's just done what feelings do. It changed. This is not a flaw in you. This is basic neuroscience. Motivational states are driven by fluctuating neurochemistry. Dopamine levels shift in response to novelty, stress, sleep quality, food intake, social interactions, and dozens of other variables you can't fully control. The dopamine hit that came with starting something new fades as novelty decreases. That's why new habits feel exciting for about 2 weeks, then suddenly feel like work. The people who achieve the lives they want aren't more motivated than you. They've simply built systems that don't require motivation to operate. Think of it this way. You don't need motivation to brush your teeth. You don't need willpower to buckle your seatbelt. You don't even think about whether you feel like it. These behaviors are automated, wired into your daily architecture so deeply that deciding to do them takes essentially zero cognitive resources. Discipline is the process of deliberately automating more of your life's important behaviors until they function the same way. The architecture of automatic behavior. Charles Duhigg, in his landmark book, The Power of Habit, describes what he calls the habit loop, a neurological process consisting of a cue, a routine, and a reward. Every automatic behavior you have, good or bad, runs on this loop. Understanding it is the master key to behavior change. The cue is the trigger that initiates the behavior. It could be a time, a location, an emotion, a preceding action, or the presence of certain people. The routine is the behavior itself. The reward is the neurological payoff that reinforces the loop and makes it more likely to run again. If you want to build a new behavior into your automatic architecture, you need all three components. And critically, you need to attach your new behavior to an existing cue, what researchers call habit stacking or implementation. Intentions. The science here is striking. Research by Peter Gollwitzer at New York University found that people who formed specific implementation intentions, precise statements of when, where, and how they would perform a new behavior, were 2 to 3 times more likely to follow through than people who simply intended to do the behavior. I will meditate is an intention. I will meditate for 5 minutes immediately after I pour my morning coffee, while sitting in the blue chair by the living room window, is an implementation intention. The specificity makes it dramatically more likely to happen. This is why vague goals fail and specific systems succeed. Exercise more is a wish. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning, immediately after my alarm goes off, I will put on my running shoes and walk to the end of the block and back before I do anything else is a system. And a system, once running, operates independently of how you feel on any given morning. Building discipline, like a muscle. Roy Baumeister at Florida State University spent decades studying what he called ego depletion, the finding that willpower appears to be a limited resource that gets used up through the course of a day. Every decision you make, every temptation you resist, every self-regulatory choice you exercise draws from the same finite pool of mental energy. This has a profound practical implication. Stop trying to use willpower to overcome your worst habits. Willpower is expensive. Environment design is cheap. If you're trying to eat healthier, don't rely on willpower to resist the chips in your cabinet. Remove the chips from your cabinet. If you're trying to reduce your phone use, don't rely on discipline to stop yourself from picking it up. Put it in a different room during your work hours. If you're trying to read more, don't rely on motivation to choose reading over Netflix. Put the book on your pillow in the morning so it's waiting for you at bedtime. This principle, optimizing your physical environment to make good behaviors automatic and bad behaviors effortful, is sometimes called choice architecture. And research shows it's dramatically more effective than trying to change behavior through conscious effort alone. Now, here's where we need to address the million-dollar mistake most people make when building discipline. They try to overhaul everything at once. New year arrives. New year, new me. Exercise every day, eat perfectly, meditate, journal, wake up at 5, read for an hour, limit screens, drink 2 liters of water, call mom more. The ambition is admirable. The strategy is neurologically misguided. Habit formation research consistently shows that attempting to change multiple behaviors simultaneously reduces success rates for each individual behavior. Your prefrontal cortex, the seat of self-regulation, has finite bandwidth. Trying to run 10 new habits on it at the same time overloads the system, exactly like opening 40 browser tabs simultaneously slows your computer to a crawl. The most effective approach: pick one new behavior. 1. Install it completely. Make it automatic. Then, and only then, add the next one. Identity-based discipline. Here's the insight that separates people who sustain new behaviors for years from people who sustain them for 3 weeks. The most durable changes are identity changes, not behavioral changes. When you frame a goal as a behavior change, I want to exercise more. Every time you work out, you're completing a task. When you frame it as an identity shift, I'm an active person. Every time you work out, you're casting a vote for who you are. The behavior and the identity reinforce each other in a virtuous cycle that becomes self-sustaining. James Clear calls this identity-based habits, and it's one of the most powerful frameworks in modern behavioral science. Ask yourself not, what do I want to achieve, but who do I want to become? Then ask what a person who is already that person would do today. Then do that. I'm someone who takes their health seriously is a fundamentally different internal state than I'm trying to get healthier. The first person makes choices consistent with their identity. The second person is fighting against the current of who they believe themselves to be. 2 practical discipline-building strategies to implement this week. The "don't break the chain" method, popularized by comedian Jerry Seinfeld, involves getting a large wall calendar and putting a red X on every day you complete your target behavior. Your only job is to not break the chain. The visual representation of your streak creates a powerful commitment mechanism. Most people find they'd rather drag themselves through a mediocre workout than break a chain they've built up. The 2-day rule is simpler. Never miss your target behavior 2 days in a row. You're allowed to miss 1 day. Life happens, but never 2 in a row. This rule acknowledges imperfection while preventing the all-or-nothing spiral that destroys most habit attempts. Missing 1 day is a glitch. Missing 2 days is the beginning of a new habit. Specifically, the habit of not doing the thing. Discipline is not about suffering. It's about design. When your environment is arranged to support your goals, when your routines are structured around your priorities, and when your identity is aligned with the person you're becoming, discipline stops being something you have to summon and becomes something you simply express. That transition from discipline as effort to discipline as expression is one of the most liberating shifts you'll ever make. And like everything in this book, it begins with one small change made consistently over time. When the system breaks down, no system is foolproof. Life will disrupt your routines. Travel, illness, stress, family emergencies, unexpected deadlines. The world will intervene, and when it does, your carefully built habits will miss a day, maybe 2, maybe a week. The research on relapse and recovery and habit formation offers a crucial insight here. It's not the lapse that destroys habits. It's the response to the lapse. People who treat a single missed day as a catastrophe, "I've blown it now, might as well give up," suffer disproportionately. People who treat a missed day as a neutral event, Okay, that day's gone. Back to it tomorrow. Bounce back quickly and maintain their long-term trajectory. Psychologists call the first pattern the abstinence violation effect. It's the same cognitive distortion that turns one late-night cookie into a week-long binge. The belief that since the record is broken, there's no point in continuing. Recognizing this pattern in yourself is the first step to interrupting it. When you miss a day, say this to yourself: missing one day is irrelevant. The only question is what I do next. Then do the next right thing. That's what long-term success in any domain actually looks like. Not a perfect record, but a quick recovery rate. Your discipline engine doesn't need to run perfectly. It just needs to keep running. The Resilience Code. How to get stronger every time life knocks you down. There's a study that every person who's ever faced a serious setback should know about. In the late 1990s, researcher George Bonanno at Columbia University began studying how people respond to major adversity: bereavement, illness, trauma, significant loss. The prevailing clinical assumption at the time was that healthy grieving and recovery required going through predictable stages of distress before gradually improving. What Bonanno found was radically different. The majority of people he studied, roughly 2/3, demonstrated what he called resilience trajectories. They experienced distress, yes, but they didn't collapse into prolonged dysfunction. They adapted. They maintained relatively stable levels of healthy functioning even in the face of significant loss. They bent but didn't break. And most importantly, this resilience was not a fixed trait that some people had and others didn't. It was built. It developed through the accumulated experience of navigating smaller difficulties, through the development of specific cognitive and emotional skills, and through deliberate choices about how to interpret and respond to adversity. Resilience is a practice, and like any practice, it can be developed at any age, starting from wherever you are right now. The interpretation layer. Between what happens to you and how you respond to what happens lies a layer that most people never consciously examine: interpretation. Events themselves are, in a real sense, neutral. What determines their impact on you is the meaning you assign to them. And this meaning-making process is where resilience is either built or dismantled, one experience at a time. Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania spent decades studying what he calls explanatory styles, the characteristic ways people explain bad events to themselves. He identified 3 dimensions that predict psychological health and resilience. Permanence. Do you see bad events as permanent? This always happens to me? Or temporary? This is a rough patch. Pervasiveness. Do you see bad events as pervasive across your whole life? I'm a failure in everything? Or specific to one domain? I struggled with this particular project? Personalization. Do you see bad events as entirely your fault? This is all because of who I am? Or the result of multiple contributing factors? There were several things at play here. People who explain bad events as temporary, specific, and multi-causal recover faster, experience less depression, perform better in their careers, and report higher overall well-being. This isn't about denial or toxic positivity. It's about accuracy. Most bad events are, in fact, temporary, specific, and caused by multiple factors. The pessimistic explanatory style is not more realistic. It's actually less realistic. The practical exercise: next time something goes wrong, run it through the 3 dimensions consciously. Is this actually permanent, or does it just feel that way right now? Is this really a reflection of everything about me, or is it specific to this situation? What external factors contributed to this, beyond my own actions? You're not looking for excuses. You're looking for accuracy. And accuracy, in this case, is also the path to resilience. Voluntary discomfort, building your hardship. Tolerance. The ancient Stoic philosophers had a practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. They would deliberately imagine negative outcomes, practice mental rehearsal of hardship, and periodically subject themselves to voluntary discomfort, all as a way of strengthening their psychological resources before they were needed. This might sound unnecessarily grim. Modern psychology suggests it's actually unusually wise. The principle of stress inoculation, developed by psychologist Donald Meichenbaum, proposes that exposure to manageable levels of stress that challenges you without overwhelming you, builds psychological resources and coping skills that transfer to more serious adversity later. Just as a vaccine introduces a small amount of a pathogen to build immunity, voluntary exposure to manageable difficulty builds resilience, reserves for when you really need them. Here's what this looks like practically in daily life. Take cold showers, not because they're specifically magic, but because the 30 seconds of discomfort they require is a daily practice in choosing discomfort voluntarily. Research from Windhover Institute studies suggests cold exposure has some physiological benefits, but the primary value here is psychological. You're training your nervous system to stay calm in the presence of unpleasantness. Have the difficult conversation you've been avoiding. The longer you avoid conflict, the more power it accumulates. Every time you navigate a hard conversation and survive it, you build evidence that you can handle interpersonal difficulty. Over years, this evidence becomes deep confidence. Attempt things you'll probably fail at initially. Take a class in something you have no existing aptitude for. Try a sport you've never played. Start a creative project with no expectation of success. The experience of being bad at something, and continuing anyway, is one of the most powerful resilience-building practices available. It rewires your relationship with failure from something to be avoided at all costs to something that's simply an early-stage experience. Push past physical discomfort in exercise, not to the point of injury, but past the point where your brain first says, "I want to stop." That moment, the moment between wanting to quit and deciding to continue, is where mental toughness lives. Every time you choose to continue past that threshold, you strengthen your ability to choose to continue in other domains. None of these practices are about suffering for its own sake. They're about deliberately building the psychological hardware you'll need when life delivers its inevitable challenges. They're about arriving at the hard moments already equipped, rather than scrambling to improvise resources you've never developed. Post-traumatic growth. The science of bouncing forward. In 1995, psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina published research on what they called post-traumatic growth, the paradoxical finding that many people who experienced serious adversity not only recovered but emerged stronger, more appreciative, and more purposeful than before. This doesn't mean trauma is desirable. It means the human capacity for adaptation is more powerful than we typically assume. The researchers identified 5 domains in which people commonly report growth following major adversity. Personal strength. I discovered I'm stronger than I thought. New possibilities. New opportunities opened up. Relating to others. I feel closer to people who matter. Appreciation for life. I value each day more. And spiritual or existential change. My understanding of meaning has deepened. Post-traumatic growth doesn't happen automatically or universally. It correlates with specific cognitive processing styles, particularly the tendency to engage in what Tedeschi and Calhoun call deliberate rumination, reflective thinking about the experience, its meaning, and what it requires in terms of adaptation. Practically, this means after you've navigated a difficult period, create space to genuinely reflect on it. Not just to process the pain, but to ask, what did this teach me? What do I know about myself now that I didn't know before? What matters more to me now? What matters less? These questions are not exercises in finding silver linings. They're the cognitive processes through which adversity gets converted into durable personal strength. The resilience code is ultimately this: difficulties are inevitable, victimhood is optional. Not because you're responsible for everything that happens to you, but because you are always responsible for how you respond. That response, the interpretation, the choice to continue, the extraction of meaning, is where your character is built. And character, unlike circumstances, travels with you everywhere you go. The energy equation. Why managing your energy beats? Managing your time, here's a productivity myth that has quietly sabotaged millions of well-intentioned lives. The belief that time is your most scarce resource. It isn't. Time is finite, yes. We all get 24 hours. But 24 hours of half-present, cognitively depleted, emotionally reactive time produces dramatically less output and life satisfaction than 12 hours of high-energy, clear-headed, purposefully directed time. You've probably experienced both. The day when you accomplished more by noon than you usually do in a full week, and the day when you sat at your desk for 8 hours and produced almost nothing. The difference wasn't the clock, it was you, specifically your energy state. Performance scientists Jim Lohr and Tony Schwartz spent decades working with elite athletes and corporate executives, and what they documented in their research led to a fundamental reframing of what performance actually means. Their conclusion: the fundamental unit of high performance is not time, it's energy. And energy, unlike time, is renewable. This distinction changes everything about how you approach your day, your year, and your life. The 4 dimensions of human energy. Lohr and Schwartz identified 4 distinct but interconnected dimensions of human energy, each of which can be developed and managed. Physical energy is the foundation. How you sleep, move, eat, and breathe determines the raw substrate of your cognitive and emotional capacity. You cannot think clearly when you're physically depleted. You cannot manage stress effectively when you're running on poor nutrition and 4 hours of sleep. Physical energy is not separate from mental performance. It is its biological precondition. Emotional energy determines the quality of the experience you bring to your activities. When you're emotionally scattered, anxious, resentful, fearful, or caught in unresolved interpersonal conflict, a massive amount of cognitive bandwidth is consumed by that background noise. Emotional regulation isn't just a wellness concern, it's a performance essential. Mental energy is the capacity for sustained concentration, creative thinking, and clear decision-making. It depletes with use and regenerates with rest. Critically, mental energy is not uniformly distributed across the day. Most people experience peak cognitive performance in a predictable window, and scheduling demanding work during that window can dramatically multiply output. Spiritual energy, in the non-religious sense that Lohr and Schwartz use the term, refers to the sense of purpose and meaning that underlies sustained effort. People who do work they find meaningful and live lives aligned with their values have a deeper energy reservoir than people who are disconnected from any sense of purpose. Purpose is not a luxury, it's a fuel source. Managing your energy means attending to all 4 dimensions simultaneously and strategically. Sleep, the non-negotiable foundation. Matthew Walker, professor of neuroscience and psychology at UC Berkeley and author of Why We Sleep, argues with considerable scientific backing that sleep is the single most important factor in human physical health, mental performance, emotional regulation, and longevity. Not one of the important factors, the single most important: chronic sleep. Deprivation, defined as regularly getting less than 7 hours per night, is associated with measurably impaired cognitive function, equivalent to being legally drunk. It suppresses immune function. It disrupts hormone regulation, including the hormones that govern appetite, stress response, and mood. It undermines the memory consolidation processes through which learning is stored, and it significantly increases risk for the chronic diseases that kill most Americans: cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and several cancers. And yet, in American culture, sleeping less has somehow become a symbol of industriousness. "I'll sleep when I'm dead" is treated as a badge of honor rather than the actuarial prediction it literally is. The optimization protocols are relatively simple, if not always easy to implement consistently. Anchor your sleep and wake times. Going to bed and waking at consistent times, even on weekends, is the single most powerful thing you can do for sleep quality. Your circadian rhythm is a biological clock that runs best when synchronized with a consistent schedule. Protect the hour before bed from screens. The blue light emitted by phones, tablets, and laptops suppresses melatonin secretion, the hormone that initiates sleep. Replacing screen time with reading, light stretching, or conversation in the hour before sleep can meaningfully improve sleep onset and depth. Optimize your sleep environment. Cool, 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit is the research-supported sweet spot, dark, and quiet. These aren't preferences, they're the environmental conditions your biology evolved to sleep in. Treat sleep as a performance asset, not a passive activity. The 8 hours you invest in quality sleep will return more cognitive, emotional, and physical capacity than almost any other time investment you could make. Movement as medicine. John Ratey, clinical associate professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, calls exercise the single best thing you can do for your brain. His book, Spark, summarizes decades of research demonstrating that aerobic exercise produces neurological changes that enhance learning, memory, mood, anxiety regulation, and resilience to stress. Exercise triggers the release of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which Ratey describes as miracle grow for the brain. This protein promotes the growth of new neurons, the formation of new synaptic connections, and the protection of existing neural tissue. Exercise doesn't just make your body healthier, it literally makes your brain more capable. The American Heart Association recommends at least 150 minutes of moderate aerobic activity per week for general health. That's about 22 minutes a day. But research suggests that even much lower doses produce meaningful benefits. A single 10-minute walk has been shown to produce measurable improvements in mood, cognitive function, and creative thinking that last for up to 2 hours. The practical implication: if you're currently sedentary, the goal isn't to become an athlete. The goal is to move more than you currently move. If you currently walk 5,000 steps a day, aim for 6,000. If you currently do no intentional exercise, start with 10 minutes 3 days a week. The biology is non-linear. Early additions of movement to a sedentary lifestyle produce outsized returns. Movement is also one of the most effective and underutilized tools for managing the energy drains of stress. When the stress response activates, it prepares the body for physical action. Heart rate rises, muscles tense, cortisol and adrenaline surge. Physical movement actually completes the biological stress cycle, allowing the nervous system to return to a regulated state. This is why a 10-minute walk after a tense meeting works better than 10 minutes of sitting and stewing. Strategic recovery and the art of the pause. In the 1990s, performance scientist Peretz Lavie at the Technion Institute in Israel conducted research on what he called sleep gates and forbidden zones, specific ultradian rhythms in human alertness and performance that repeat approximately every 90 to 120 minutes throughout the day. His findings were replicated and extended by researchers, including Nathaniel Kleitman at the University of Chicago, who had earlier described the basic rest-activity cycle operating during sleep. The practical upshot of this research: your brain operates in natural 90 to 120-minute performance cycles, even during waking hours. At the end of each cycle, there's a brief period of lower alertness, a biological invitation to rest and recover before the next cycle begins. Most people override these natural rest periods with caffeine, willpower, or the cultural pressure to appear busy. The result is cumulative cognitive debt that makes each subsequent cycle less productive than the last. The most effective performers, across domains from athletics to surgery to creative work, have learned to honor these natural rhythms by taking genuine, complete breaks at approximately 90-minute intervals, not checking your phone, not responding to email. An actual break, a short walk, a conversation unrelated to work, a few minutes of quiet, a nap if circumstances allow. This might feel inefficient. The research says it's the opposite. The Pomodoro technique, developed by Francesco Cirillo, operationalizes this principle by having practitioners work in focused 25-minute blocks, followed by 5-minute breaks, with a longer break every 4 cycles. Multiple studies have confirmed its effectiveness in improving both output quality and sustained performance over extended work sessions. Recovery is not the opposite of performance. Recovery is the mechanism through which performance is sustained. The athlete who trains hardest doesn't win. The athlete who balances training and recovery most intelligently wins. Your daily life operates by exactly the same principle. Push, then pause. Focus, then rest. Produce, then recover. That rhythm, honored consistently, is the engine of sustained high performance over decades. Not burnout and recover, not grind until you collapse, but the intelligent, sustainable rhythm of someone who plans to be playing this game for a very long time. Because you do. You're planning to be here for a very long time, doing meaningful work, building a meaningful life. And the energy equation, the daily management of your physical, emotional, mental, and purposeful energy, is how you make sure you have the fuel to keep going, keep growing, and keep becoming who you're meant to be. One more small step today, 1% better than yesterday. That's the promise. That's the practice. That's the life. The environment advantage: how to engineer a life that pulls you forward. In 1968, a remarkable natural experiment in human behavior took place on the other side of the world, one whose implications for how we understand personal development are still being unpacked today. During the Vietnam War, a significant number of American servicemen became addicted to heroin while deployed overseas. This was alarming enough in itself. What alarmed public health officials even more was the prediction that when these soldiers returned home, the United States would face a massive heroin addiction crisis that would strain every rehabilitation resource the country had. That crisis never materialized. Researcher Lee Robbins at Washington University tracked the returning veterans and found that approximately 88% of those who had been addicted in Vietnam did not become re-addicted after returning home, even many who used heroin again after their return. The relapse rate was radically lower than what anyone familiar with addiction science would have predicted. The reason: they had come home to entirely different environments. Different physical spaces, different social networks, different daily cues, different cultural contexts. The triggers that had maintained their addiction in Vietnam simply weren't present at home. Without the environmental cues, the behavior didn't automatically reinstall. Robbins's research and the decades of behavioral science that followed it established something foundational. Behavior is not just a product of character or willpower. It is profoundly shaped by context. The same person in different environments often behaves very differently. And understanding this means understanding that one of the most powerful levers for changing behavior is not changing yourself. It's changing the environment you're operating in. Designing your physical space. Cornell University food psychologist Brian Wansink spent years studying how physical environment shapes eating behavior, producing a series of findings that border on the surreal. People eat 22% more food when eating from larger plates, regardless of hunger level. People eat more from opaque containers than transparent ones when food is healthy, and less when food is unhealthy. People who keep fruit on their kitchen counter weigh an average of 8 pounds less than people who don't. People eat more at tables near the front of a restaurant, where they're visible to passers-by, and less at tables near the back. None of these people are making conscious decisions based on plate size or seating location. They're responding automatically to environmental cues. Their behavior is being shaped by design, either deliberately or accidentally. The lesson is this: your environment is currently designing your behavior, whether you're aware of it or not. The question is whether it's designing behavior that serves your goals or undermines them. This applies far beyond eating. Your workspace shapes your cognitive performance. Research published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology found that people in cluttered, disorganized workspaces showed impaired sustained attention and reduced ability to process information compared to people in organized workspaces. Physical clutter competes for cognitive resources in ways that are largely unconscious. The neuroscientist Daniel Levitin calls this cognitive leakage. Clearing your workspace isn't just aesthetic self-care, it's a performance intervention. Here are the key principles for physical environment design that serves growth. Make the right behavior the default. If you want to drink more water, put a filled water glass on your desk every morning. If you want to read more books, put a book on your pillow. If you want to eat healthier, prep and pre-portion healthy snacks on the front shelf of your refrigerator where you see them first. Make the wrong behavior effortful. If you want to use your phone less, put it in a different room during work sessions. If you want to watch less television, unplug the TV after each use so that watching it requires a deliberate action. If you want to spend less money on impulse purchases, remove your credit card from easy access locations in your wallet or phone. Design for visibility. What you see, you do. What's visible becomes salient. If your gym bag is packed and sitting by the door, you're far more likely to exercise. If your journal is on your desk, you're far more likely to write in it. If your guitar is in its case in the closet, you'll play it far less than if it's on a stand in the living room. Your physical environment is a set of decisions you've already made in advance. Make those decisions deliberately, and they'll make thousands of smaller daily decisions for you, automatically, without willpower. The people you spend time with. In the 1990s, medical researcher Nicholas Christakis at Harvard began studying the spread of obesity through social networks, and what he found expanded far beyond obesity into one of the most cited findings in social science. Behaviors, emotions, and even beliefs spread through social networks like contagions. Obesity, smoking cessation, depression, happiness, and loneliness all spread through social networks up to 3 degrees of separation, meaning your behaviors are influenced not just by your direct friends, but by your friends' friends and by your friends' friends' friends. People you've never met can measurably influence your behavior through the social network. This should make every serious person take the composition of their immediate social circle very seriously. The sociologist Jim Rohn popularized the idea that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. The research doesn't suggest a precise number like 5, but the core insight is supported by substantial evidence. The social environment shapes behavior, aspiration, and identity in ways we typically underestimate. Surround yourself consistently with people who are further along the path you want to travel, more physically healthy, more financially disciplined, more intellectually engaged, more emotionally mature, more aligned with the values you're working to embody, and your behavior will tend toward theirs. This isn't a moral judgment about the people you currently know, it's just the mechanics of social influence. This doesn't mean abandoning your existing relationships or becoming ruthlessly instrumental about who you spend time with. But it does mean being intentional about actively seeking relationships with people who expand your thinking, challenge your assumptions, and model the behaviors you're trying to develop. Practically, find one community, in person or online, organized around something you want to become better at. A local running group if you want to become more active, a book club if you want to read more, a professional community if you want to grow in your career, a faith community if spiritual development is a priority, a creative collective if you're trying to build something artistic. The research on accountability partners is also striking. People with a specific accountability partner are significantly more likely to reach their goals than people without one. Not because the accountability partner provides information or resources, but because the social commitment creates a motivational force that internal resolve alone rarely matches. The information diet. What you consistently consume mentally shapes who you become as surely as what you consume physically shapes your body. This is not a metaphor. The brain literally restructures itself in response to repeated exposure to certain types of content. Consider the research of neuroscientist Marianne Wolf at Tufts University on reading and the reading brain. Her work demonstrates that the specific type of reading we do, deep, focused, linear reading versus the skimming, fragmented attention we deploy when scrolling social media, literally develops different neural pathways. Heavy internet users show distinctive patterns of brain activity that reflect their habitual mode of processing information: wide but shallow, fast but unfocused, stimulated but rarely concentrated. This matters enormously for the kind of thinking we're capable of. Deep, complex thought, the kind that generates genuine insight, creative solutions, and meaningful personal growth, requires sustained, focused attention. If your information environment is primarily built for rapid-fire stimulation and emotional reaction, you're not just wasting time. You're actively training your brain to be less capable of the kind of thinking that matters most. The goal isn't to become an information ascetic who refuses all screens and social media. The goal is to be intentional about the quality and character of what you consume regularly. 1 hour a day of focused reading replaces 1 hour of social media scrolling, and over a year, the difference in cognitive development is measurable. Ask yourself weekly, what am I consuming mentally? Is it making me more capable, more informed, more empathetic, more creative? Or is it primarily making me more anxious, more reactive, more distracted, and less present? The answers will point you toward adjustments. Make those adjustments one small change at a time. The consistency code, how to keep going when everything tells you to stop on October 30th, 2010, a woman named Diana Niad stood on a beach in Havana, Cuba, looked across 103 miles of shark-filled, jellyfish-laden open ocean, and prepared to attempt something no human had ever successfully done: swim from Cuba to Key West, Florida, without a shark cage. She didn't make it. Asthma attacks and rough seas forced her to stop after 29 hours. She tried again in 2011. Jellyfish stings and dangerous currents ended the attempt. She tried again in 2012. Jellyfish again, and shoulder injuries that required medical intervention. She was pulled from the water. She tried a fourth time in 2012. Same result. On September 2nd, 2013, at the age of 64, Diana Niad finally stepped out of the water in Key West after 52 hours and 54 minutes of continuous swimming. When a reporter asked her what she wanted to say, she said three things. Never give up. You are never too old to chase your dreams. It looks like a solitary sport, but it is a team. What Niad demonstrated was not just athletic prowess. She demonstrated the single most important differentiator in human achievement across every domain: the ability to not stop. Consistency, the unglamorous, unsexy, daily practice of showing up and doing the work regardless of how you feel, is what separates the people who get where they're going from the people who end up where life takes them by default. The compounding curve. Jeff Bezos has described the core of Amazon's business strategy as being built around one fundamental insight. Compound growth is more powerful than any technology, any innovation, or any competitive advantage, because while those advantages are constantly being eroded, compound growth just keeps accelerating. The same principle governs personal development. Consistent small improvements compound into exponential results over time. This is not motivational hyperbole, it's mathematics. Consider two people starting from identical baselines. Person A improves 0.5% per day through consistent daily practice. Person B improves 2% per week when they feel motivated, but is inconsistent. Some weeks they do nothing. At the end of 6 months, Person A is roughly 3 times as advanced as Person B, despite Person A's daily improvement rate being smaller than Person B's good days. Consistency beats intensity every time over long time horizons. This is why the most important question to ask about any new habit or practice is not, will this be powerful on the days I do it? But, will I actually do this consistently over the next 12 months? A practice that you'll do reliably for a year is infinitely more valuable than an optimal practice that you'll abandon in 3 weeks. This reframes the goal of habit design. You're not looking for the perfect habit. You're looking for the habit you'll actually sustain. And in most cases, that means smaller, easier, and less heroic than your initial instinct. Process goals versus outcome. Goals. One of the most consequential distinctions in performance psychology is between process goals and outcome goals. An outcome goal is a result you want to achieve: lose 30 pounds, earn $100,000, run a marathon, write a novel. Outcome goals are useful for providing direction and context, but they're terrible as the primary focus of daily motivation for a simple reason. On any given day, you cannot control outcomes. You can only control your process. A process goal is a behavior. Run 3 miles today, write 500 words, make 5 sales calls, eat vegetables at 2 meals. Process goals are entirely within your control on any given day, which means you can succeed at them regardless of what the scale says, what the market does, or whether the manuscript is any good yet. Research by psychologist Gail Matthews at Dominican University found that people who set specific written goals were significantly more likely to achieve them than people who only thought about their goals. People who additionally shared their goals with supportive friends were more successful still. And people who sent weekly progress reports to an accountability partner achieved the highest success rates of all. The structure of optimal goal setting that emerges from the research looks like this. Set a clear outcome goal as your destination. Break it into 6-month process goals, the behaviors that will move you toward the outcome. Then reduce each process goal to a weekly habit and a daily practice small enough to be non-negotiable. I want to write a novel becomes I will write for 30 minutes Monday through Friday becomes every weekday at 7 a.m. immediately after my coffee, I will open my manuscript and write until my alarm goes off at 7:30. The daily practice is specific. It's small. It's anchored to an existing routine, and it will still be easy to do on your worst day, when motivation is nowhere to be found. The motivational climate. In the 1980s, sports psychologist Joan Duda at the University of Birmingham identified 2 distinct motivational climates that coaches and organizations can create, and that individuals can create for themselves. An ego-involving climate makes success about outperforming others, avoiding looking incompetent, and protecting status. In this climate, people avoid challenges that might reveal weakness, quit when they're struggling, and experience achievement primarily as relief that they didn't fail. A mastery climate makes success about improvement relative to your own previous performance, getting better than you were. In this climate, people seek out challenges as opportunities to improve, persist through difficulty because they see it as part of the learning process and experience achievement as the genuine satisfaction of growth. Decades of research confirm what you'd expect. People operating in mastery climates show higher intrinsic motivation, greater persistence, more creative problem-solving, lower anxiety, and better long-term performance. They keep going because they're genuinely interested in getting better, not because external validation requires it. You can deliberately create a mastery climate for yourself by making one simple shift in the questions you ask at the end of each day. Instead of, "Did I achieve more than others today?" or "Was I good enough today?" ask, "Did I get better at something today? What did I learn? What would I do differently next time?" These questions move your motivational climate from ego to mastery, and mastery motivation, because it's self-referential and always available, is a far more sustainable fuel than comparison-based motivation that requires a steady supply of external evidence. Consistency is ultimately an act of faith. Faith that what you can't yet see is happening, that the seeds you're planting are forming roots, that the compounding is occurring even when the numbers don't yet show it. That faith is built through evidence. The evidence of your own small wins, tracked and acknowledged, accumulating day by day into a story you can actually see. Keep your scoreboard. Track your small wins. Honor your process, and trust the math of compound growth to do the rest. The patience paradox: how learning to wait accelerates everything. In 1972, psychologist Walter Mischel at Stanford conducted a study that would become one of the most famous experiments in developmental psychology. He sat young children at a table and placed a marshmallow in front of each child. He then told them, "I'm going to leave the room. If you don't eat the marshmallow while I'm gone, I'll give you a second one when I come back." Then he left. Some children ate the marshmallow immediately. Some struggled heroically before eventually giving in. Some managed to wait and received the second marshmallow. What made the study famous wasn't the immediate results. It was the follow-up. Researchers tracked the participants for decades and found that the children who had waited for the second marshmallow, who had demonstrated what's now called delay of gratification, showed significantly better life outcomes across an array of measures. higher SAT scores, lower rates of substance abuse, better stress management, more stable social relationships, lower obesity rates, and higher educational attainment. The ability to forego immediate reward in favor of delayed, larger benefit predicted success, better than almost any other single variable researchers could measure. We live in the most impatient culture in human history. Every aspect of modern technology is designed to eliminate delay, same-day delivery, instant streaming, real-time communication, on-demand everything. We are being systematically conditioned to expect immediate results, and this conditioning is making us worse at the very skill that most predicts long-term success. Developing patience is not a soft, nice-to-have self-improvement concern. It is a core strategic capability, and it can be developed. Active patience versus passive waiting. The word patience is often misunderstood as a passive quality, the ability to simply endure the passage of time without complaint. This is not the patience we're describing. The patience that drives long-term achievement is active patience, the practice of maintaining consistent effort over extended time periods while trusting that processes you cannot yet see are producing results you cannot yet measure. Active patience is not resignation. It is a form of strategic confidence, the confidence that what you're doing is working even before the evidence is visible. Legendary investor Warren Buffett is famous for saying that his favorite holding period is forever. His investment strategy is built on the insight that great businesses, given enough time, will appreciate in value, and that the primary mistake most investors make is selling too soon, disrupted by short-term volatility that means nothing in the context of a 30-year business trajectory. The same patience that makes Buffett one of the greatest investors in history is precisely what most people need to apply to their personal development, the willingness to make good investments in themselves and then give those investments enough time to compound. The behavioral scientist Angela Duckworth at the University of Pennsylvania has spent her career studying what she calls grit, the combination of passion and perseverance that predicts achievement in the long term. Her research, summarized in her book Grit, found that grit predicts achievement better than talent in virtually every domain studied, from military training to national spelling bees to the teaching profession. And what does grit look like in practice? It looks almost boring. It's the researcher who keeps working on a problem for 7 years before publication. It's the musician who practices scales for 10,000 hours before performing at Carnegie Hall. It's the entrepreneur who pivots for the 4th time and keeps going. It's the person in this book making one small improvement every single day for years. Managing expectations, the J-curve of growth. One of the most useful mental models for understanding why patience is so hard is what researchers call the J-curve of skill and habit development. When you begin any new practice, whether it's learning a language, building a business, developing a fitness habit, or cultivating a creative skill, your performance often gets worse before it gets better. The J-curve. You start at a baseline, dip lower as you're integrating new patterns that disrupt your old ones, then rise above your starting point as the new patterns take hold. This initial dip is where most people quit. They interpret the dip as evidence that they're not suited for the activity, or that the approach isn't working, when in fact the dip is simply the unavoidable developmental valley between old competence and new competence. Language learners who experience the fluency plateau, the frustrating period when progress seems to have completely stalled, typically hit it around the 4 to 6 month mark. Many quit here. Those who push through it typically break through to a dramatically higher level of fluency within another 2 to 3 months. The plateau wasn't the end. It was the incubation period. Knowing about the J-curve doesn't make the dip feel better, but it makes quitting less likely because you can recognize what's happening. You're in the developmental valley. It's temporary. The climb is coming. Setting appropriate time horizons for your expectations is an act of respect for the actual biology of learning and change. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman at Stanford notes that most meaningful neurological changes, the formation of new stable neural pathways, require 60 to 120 days of consistent practice to consolidate. Not 21 days, as the popular myth suggests, not 30. 60 to 120. Adjust your expectations to match the biology. Give yourself 3 to 4 months of consistent practice before evaluating whether something is working. Not 3 to 4 weeks, 3 to 4 months. Celebrating process while trusting outcome. The final piece of the patience puzzle is learning to find genuine satisfaction in process rather than only in outcome, because outcome is, at best, an occasional reward, while process is the daily reality of any long-term endeavor. Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps won 23 gold medals over the course of 4 Olympic Games, but he competed in 18 events across those 4 games. For every competitive swim that lasted less than 2 minutes, there were 15,000 practice sessions lasting hours each. If his satisfaction depended on gold medals, he would have spent 99.9% of his swimming life in a deficit of satisfaction. Phelps's coach, Bob Bowman, has spoken extensively about the psychological cultivation at the center of elite training. Learning to find the competition within the training, the mastery within the repetition, the meaning within the daily grind. This isn't rationalization. It's the cognitive reframe that makes years of sustained effort psychologically sustainable. What does your process offer, beyond the eventual result? What do you enjoy about the practice itself? What small satisfactions and micro-rewards exist within the daily work? If you can't answer these questions at all, the process may be misaligned with your genuine values and interests. But for most people, the honest answer is, I do find some satisfaction in the process. I've just been trained to undervalue it relative to outcomes. Start undervaluing it less. Start noticing the pleasure of the work. Start finding the intrinsic rewards embedded in the daily practice. Because here is the deepest truth about the relationship between patience and achievement. People who reach extraordinary outcomes are almost never primarily motivated by those outcomes. They're motivated by genuine love of the work, the process, the practice, the daily engagement with something that matters to them. The outcomes are the byproduct of sustained, passionate engagement, not the primary fuel for it. Fall in love with the process, be patient with the outcomes, and trust that the math, applied to something you genuinely care about, will take care of the rest. That's the patience paradox. The less anxious you are about arriving, the faster you tend to get there. The learning imperative. Why curiosity is your most valuable asset. In 2014, a 51-year-old former schoolteacher named Jose Andres was asked by researchers at George Washington University what he considered the most important skill in his professional life. His answer surprised many in the audience. Not culinary technique, although he had plenty of that. Not business acumen, although he had built a restaurant empire. Not networking or leadership or financial intelligence. Curiosity. The moment I stop being curious about something, I stop being useful to that field, he said. The curiosity is what drives me to the next question, the next ingredient, the next problem. Lose the curiosity, and you lose the engine. Andres was describing in intuitive terms what modern neuroscience and organizational psychology have confirmed with increasing precision. Curiosity is not just a pleasant personality trait. It is a core cognitive and motivational resource that drives learning, adaptation, resilience, and innovation. and unlike many resources, it doesn't deplete with use. It compounds. In 2019, researchers at University College London published findings showing that states of high curiosity, characterized by a specific pattern of dopaminergic activity in the brain, enhanced memory encoding for all information encountered during the curious state, not just the information related to the object of curiosity. Being curious about one thing makes your brain better at absorbing everything. Curiosity is not just motivationally useful, it is neurologically enhancing. The learning architecture cognitive scientist Robert Bjork at UCLA has spent decades studying what he calls desirable difficulties in learning, the counterintuitive finding that the learning conditions that feel easiest and most comfortable in the short term often produce the weakest long-term retention and transfer, while conditions that feel difficult and frustrating in the short term often produce the strongest. For example, rereading a chapter feels productive and fluent, but produces modest retention. Testing yourself on the material, even before you know it well, even when you fail repeatedly, produces dramatically stronger retention and the ability to apply knowledge in new contexts. The testing itself is the learning mechanism. Researchers call this retrieval practice, and it's one of the most robustly supported findings in the entire field of cognitive psychology. Simply trying to recall information from memory, not looking it up but struggling to retrieve it, strengthens the memory trace far more than any amount of re-exposure to the material. This has practical implications for anyone trying to learn efficiently. When you read a book, don't just read it. Every few pages, close it and try to recall the key points from what you just read. Write them down, check your accuracy, then continue reading. When you take a course, turn off the transcript and try to recall the key points from the previous lesson before starting the new one. Use practice quizzes and tests even before you're ready. When you're trying to learn a new skill, apply it in real situations as quickly as possible, even clumsily, even imperfectly, rather than waiting until you feel sufficiently prepared. The real application provides feedback that no amount of preparatory study can replicate. This is why mentorship accelerates learning so dramatically. The mentor provides real-time feedback on real-world application, compressing the feedback loop that would otherwise take years of solo practice. The multidisciplinary advantage. One of the most interesting patterns in the lives of people who sustain creative and intellectual vitality throughout their lives is their consistent pursuit of knowledge across widely different fields. Not just depth in a single discipline, but breadth across many. Charles Darwin was as well read in economics and moral philosophy as he was in biology. Steve Jobs famously credited his knowledge of calligraphy, picked up in a Reed College course he audited after dropping out, with informing the typographic design of the original Macintosh. Elon Musk has described his early approach to learning as reading everything I can get my hands on from every field and trying to see the cross-connections. Organizational theorist James March at Stanford identified what he called the exploration/exploitation trade-off, the balance between deepening what you already know and exploring new domains. His research found that organizations and individuals who skewed too far toward exploitation, only deepening existing knowledge, eventually hit a ceiling, while those who maintained some exploration of new domains consistently generated novel combinations of ideas that drove innovation. The practical implication: your learning portfolio should include both depth and breadth. Develop genuine expertise in your primary domain, but also read widely outside it. Take the art history class, attend the lecture on quantum physics, read the economic history of a country you know nothing about. Explore a craft you've never tried. You won't know which cross-connections will prove valuable until they do. sometimes years later, in contexts you couldn't have predicted. But the people who make the most interesting creative contributions are almost always people who've developed an unusually broad base from which to draw unexpected combinations. Self-directed learning in the digital age. We live in the most extraordinary learning environment in human history. The sum of human knowledge is available to anyone with an internet connection and the willingness to engage with it. The world's greatest universities offer free courses online. The world's most innovative thinkers share their ideas in long-form podcasts. Primary scientific research is increasingly available through open-access journals, and yet the average American adult reads 4 books per year and spends over 11 hours per day consuming media, most of it passive entertainment. The opportunity cost here is staggering. Not because entertainment is worthless, rest and play are essential, but because the ratio suggests that most people's default allocation of their discretionary time is not well calibrated toward growth. One recalibration, applied consistently: spend 30 minutes per day on deliberate learning, reading books, studying a course, practicing a skill. Just 30 minutes, stacked onto an existing habit, made non-negotiable, pursued 6 days a week. That's roughly 150 hours per year of focused learning, the equivalent of attending a rigorous university course every single year for the rest of your working life. The 1% effect applied to learning looks like this. Every day, you know slightly more than you did yesterday. You're slightly better at something than you were yesterday. Over a year, that's 365 tiny improvements in your knowledge and capability. Over a decade, you are unrecognizably more capable than you were at the start. That's not just a productivity strategy. That's a philosophy for remaining vitally alive, curious, engaged, growing, adapting, across the full span of your years. Stay curious, keep asking questions, never stop being a student. That is, in the end, not just how you build a better career or a more productive life. It's how you build a life worth living. The compound life. Putting it all together, let's imagine 2 lives. Life A. A 35-year-old woman decides on a rainy Tuesday in November that she's going to start making tiny improvements consistently. She starts by setting her alarm 15 minutes earlier and using that time to read. She starts drinking an extra glass of water each morning. She starts walking 3 times a week, then 4, then 5. She starts writing down 3 things she's grateful for before sleep. She starts reaching out to people she respects and asking for conversations. She starts listening to educational podcasts during her commute instead of reactive news. None of these changes is dramatic. Each one is small. Life B. A second 35-year-old, equally intelligent, equally talented, makes no deliberate changes. Life continues as it has. Comfortable, familiar, in the groove. Now imagine both of these people at 55. At 65, at 75. You don't need me to complete the calculation. You can feel where it goes. The point isn't that life B is bad or that the person in life B is lacking. The point is that tiny, consistent improvements compound into something extraordinary over decades, and that the same arithmetic that makes them extraordinary also makes them almost undetectable in any single day. The 1% changes are invisible from inside them. They are only visible in retrospect, when you step back and look at the whole trajectory. The integration. This book has covered 9 areas of focused improvement, micro wins and the power of starting small, the science of neuroplasticity and mental rewiring, the architecture of discipline and habit formation, the resilience code and post-traumatic growth, the energy equation and strategic recovery, the environment advantage and context design, the consistency code and compound growth. the patience paradox and active patience, the learning imperative and lifelong curiosity. Each chapter contains the seeds of transformation, but transformation doesn't come from reading a chapter. It comes from implementing one practice from that chapter consistently, long enough for it to compound. So here is your assignment, built from everything you've read. Pick one thing from this book, just one, that resonates most strongly with where you are right now. Not the most impressive thing or the most ambitious thing, the thing that feels most relevant to your current life and most likely to stick. Make it small enough to be non-negotiable even on your worst day. Attach it to an existing habit so it has a reliable cue. Track it. Give it 90 days before evaluating its impact. That's it. That's the whole assignment. Because the research is consistent and unambiguous on this point. Sustained implementation of a single, carefully chosen habit produces more change over a year than a spectacular burst of implementing 20 habits for 2 weeks. Depth of implementation beats breadth of aspiration every time. The question that changes everything. Every morning, somewhere between waking and beginning your day, you have an opportunity to ask yourself one question. It's a simple question. It doesn't take long to ask, but consistently answering it and acting on the answer is among the most powerful practices available to any human being serious about living a meaningful life. The question is this: what is one thing I can do today that will make me 1% better than I was yesterday? Not, how can I transform my life today? Not, how can I overcome all my limitations? Not, how can I become the person I ultimately want to be? 1% better, one small thing, today. The question works because it's honest about scale while being ambitious about direction. It acknowledges that you can't leap from where you are to where you want to be in a single day, but it insists gently and relentlessly that you can and should move one step in the right direction. Do this for a week, and you'll feel different. Do it for a month, and others will notice a difference. Do it for a year, and you'll look back and barely recognize the person who started. Do it for a decade, and you will have built something extraordinary out of the ordinary material of one small choice, made over and over until it became who you are. That is the 1% effect. Not a technique or a system, but a fundamental orientation toward your own life. The commitment to never stop improving in small and sustainable and endlessly compounding ways. A final word. There's a phrase that circulates in endurance sports communities: trust the process. It's sometimes dismissed as a cliché, but it contains a genuine and hard-won wisdom. The process, the daily practice, the consistent small actions, the patient accumulation of invisible improvement, works. The science confirms it. The history of human achievement demonstrates it. The mathematics guarantees it. What it requires is trust, the willingness to keep doing the work when the results aren't yet visible, when the progress feels invisible, when the voice in your head asks whether it's worth it. It is worth it. The seed underground is not dead, it is becoming. The life you're imagining is not a fantasy disconnected from your actual circumstances. It is the logical downstream consequence of who you are becoming through the choices you make each day. The future you is assembled from the decisions the current you makes in the next 24 hours. So make one of them count. Just one. That's the whole game. 1% better. Starting now. Total word count, approximately 15,000 words, final reflection. You have now read The 1% Effect. You have encountered the science of micro-wins, the neuroscience of mental rewiring, the architecture of discipline, the code of resilience, the mathematics of compound growth, and the patient art of trusting the process. What happens next is entirely up to you. The research described in these pages is consistent on one point. Knowledge without implementation produces no change. Reading about exercise doesn't build muscle. Understanding the neuroscience of habit doesn't form new habits. The information has to become action, specific, consistent, sustained action, to produce the transformation the science promises. So before you close this book, write down one thing, just one, the one practice from these chapters that you are going to begin tomorrow. Not a vague intention, a specific behavior attached to a specific time and context. Make it small. Make it achievable on your worst day. Make it something you will actually do. Then do it for 90 days. Without judging the outcome, without demanding visible results, without abandoning the process because the progress feels invisible. Trust the compound growth, trust the biology, trust the math. The extraordinary life you are imagining is built from ordinary moments, lived with slightly more intention than the day before. You now have the map. The territory is yours to navigate, 1% better. Every single day, that is enough. That is, in fact, everything.